Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm very happy to be here virtually with all of you. I may have met some of you. Some of you may have heard me or some of my colleagues speak in the past. As Erica said, what we're going to do today is just look at the state of fashion and comfort footwear in the U.S. in 2018 and really think about what the trends are, what's happening in the industry, and what that means for moving forward. So for those of you who aren't familiar with NPD, I'm going to do a very simple overview. It's kind of 3 pillars. We obviously have a lot of data. We do consumer surveys in many different industries, and we also have relationships with retailers where we receive their data, and we package that back up, and we work with our clients, and we help them make decisions. And we combine that with industry expertise in all of the various categories and industries that we track. We don't just, push out data and reports and you're on your own. We help you understand what the implications and what the meanings are. And then we also, on a case-by-case basis, can take all that data and marry that with some of the business questions that you have. Perhaps it's trying to understand the impacts of some of your marketing activities or doing some concept testing or some forecasting work. We have data at a very granular level that we can then input into models, and we've got a team on hand that then can help us understand the conclusions and provide direction based on that. And of course, we have very deep relationships with our clients. The work we do with our clients is confidential, but it works best when we're true partners and we can understand, your business so that we then can provide you with the best support back. And basically, that all adds up to the fact that we help our clients achieve data-driven growth. So I hope to show you some of that in action today. So what we're going to do is first, I always like to start big, and we'll look at what's going on. One of the benefits of working at NPD is that we track many different industries. So we'll talk about what's going on in some of those, and sometimes that's the most interesting part because it may expose you to some things you didn't think about. And then we'll talk about footwear in depth, of course, and I've kind of bucketed it into about 5 themes that I see going on in the market this year, and that will have implications moving forward. And then we'll sum it all up and we'll look forward, and I added a couple of thoughts as to, what I see happening this holiday season as we are just on the cusp there. After we get through tomorrow, it's a full-on holiday season. Okay, so let's get started with the macro view. So this is a compilation of a number of industries that NPD tracks, most of the big ones. And it's through June, and we'll be adding our September results to these shortly, but we don't expect the trajectory to change. As you can see, as we ended last year, we were coming out of a little bit of a funk in terms of retail growth. It had dipped into the negative a little bit, but holiday last year was very positive, and then moving forward through this year, retail sales have been pretty strong. That does vary by category. When you look at what's going on with the economy, consumer confidence is pretty good, unemployment is low. So there are some key economic metrics that are fueling consumers to feel more confident about their spending. But that doesn't mean that they're not being cautious about it. If we take a look at some of the industries, and I've bucketed them into groups, here are kind of the shining stars in the year ending June. Video games is cyclical. It's usually either at the top of the list or at the bottom of the list, but actually it's sat up at the top of the list for some time now because last year the Nintendo Switch was the big platform that was launched, and of course heading into this year, Fortnite has been the biggest craze, and so all of the in-app purchases that go on in Fortnite. And I don't have, I'm not a player, and I don't have, kids the demographic that are playing right now, but I do hear that it is obviously quite the obsession, and I did read a lot of articles heading into back to school that, parents were needing to detox their kids from playing Fortnite to get them ready to go back to school. Beauty is an area that's been very strong for many years. I mean, 10+ years at this point. It's been, towards the top of this growth list. And, there's still a lot of innovation going on. Ulta and Sephora, which are the top retailers in this space, have figured out how to get consumers still coming back into the store with services, allowing them to play and experiment. And also there are a lot of smaller brands right now that are playing into younger consumers' desire for wellness, health and wellness. So a lot of the indie brands are helping this business to grow. Small appliances, coming off of a really strong holiday last year with the Instant Pot. Not sure if anybody got one of those for last holiday, but there are other things like the Roomba vacuum that your cat can ride along on. And also oral care is another category that has been strong. So this is kind of seeing a second wave of growth after a few years ago. It was kind of the initial single-serve coffee makers, the soda stream that, got a little bit, as those became saturated in households, the business slowed down, but that Instant Pot and a couple of new innovations have really driven that back up again. Home is a theme that you'll hear me mention. There are other indicators in businesses that we track that the home business is very strong, so we do see consumers spending money in that space, which maybe is decreasing spending in other spaces. Here are some industries that are growing about mid-single digits. Auto, for us, that's auto aftermarket. We don't track auto sales, but we track what you would get at an AutoZone or a Pep Boy. And consumers, really want their cars to run well and run longer, so they're putting more into them. And here, of course, in footwear, we complain about the weather all the time. It's either, it's too hot in the winter or it's too cool in the spring, and so that affects our sales. But in auto, that seems to help one way or the other, because if it's cold, we have you have battery issues. If it's warm, you have air conditioning issues, so needing products to fix those things. Consumer tech is actually positive after a number of years of negatives. We're starting to see the benefits of a new crop of TV technology, and that's at very high price points, so that's driving the market. Smart home, phone accessories are all contributing to that. Footwear, we're going to go into in depth, but this is the most positive number we have seen in quite some time. The first time we'd seen it positive was basically at the end of the year, at the end of 2017, and that was basically just flat to up 1, but the first half of this year was very strong, and we'll talk about that. Toys has been another solid industry. Its dollar performance is actually a little bit lower than it has been, because the toys that are really growing right now are more lower price points, so collectibles. And here's the age. Here I do have a daughter where I have now getting some expertise here, so Shopkins and LOL Surprise and anything that has a blind bag that you don't know what's in it. So really that $5 to $20 price points are what's driving the business. Despite the fact, and there's growth despite the fact that we've obviously had a big shift in the retail landscape there. Next couple of industries with low single-digit growth. Office supplies is still benefiting from the slime trend. So those of you that have kids know that they love to make slime, and so office supply retailers and online retailers are selling a lot of Elmer's glue. Housewares, back to that home theme. Consumers tell us in various surveys that we do that they're staying home more, they're entertaining. So barware is up. And some of the success here stems from the fact that the home improvement business has grown, so that kind of has a halo effect and leads down into small appliances and major appliances as well, and then into the houseware space. Food, this is restaurants. So actually restaurant traffic is down a bit, and what we're seeing really growing is delivery, which is great, but that's actually a challenge for restaurants that depend on bar revenue. Is that impulse and where they make a lot of their money. But it's great for the consumer. Apparel, we are still seeing, active apparel outperforming other types of apparel. We're seeing some industries really turn around, though, like jeans and denim really benefiting, like in fashion footwear that I'll talk about, where we're seeing the fashion space benefiting from the comfort and athletic aesthetic that the athletic business is bringing. That's happening in apparel as well. So we're starting to see some turnaround in categories like denim that are incorporating some of the performance and comfort features of active apparel. And the growth of active apparel certainly has an impact on footwear. And accessories, which is the other area that I cover closely, has been negative for quite some time. So while it's still on the bottom of the list, it's comforting to see that it's starting to flatten out. This has largely been driven by softness in the jewelry business, but also the handbag business, which has had a very tough couple of years as some of the major brands have had to retool and pull back distribution and pull out of promotions and really, most like relaunch their brands. And, this is an area where we see that spending in other areas has really hindered spending in the handbag business. And we know we're all following what's going on with a lot of store closings, but there's also openings. So it's really interesting to look at the list of who's closing and who's opening. Now, the retailers on this list of closings, they're not necessarily all going out of business. Some may be. But a lot of it is just about, focusing on other things and just right-sizing the store fleet. But what's interesting is when you compare that to the list of store openings, it's a really fascinating list, I think. You see some discounters, you see mass retailers, smaller scale. So like Target, that's really more with the small scale urban stores. Nordstrom, it's with the local concept. Off-price, you see Tractor Supply, so that's the work and construction business. And then also a lot of the direct-to-consumer brands going into retail, into physical retail, because they know that that's an important way to reach consumers as well. So physical retail is not dead, of course. You also see some of the resale players like the RealReal and ThredUp going into physical stores. And I love the RealReal store down in Soho, New York. You don't even know it's a resale store. It looks more like just a high-end department store. And of course, there have been, in our space specifically, there have been some bankruptcies, and many of those are on the mend and are being turned around right now. But what's important to know is that where you as brands and you as retailers can come in and scoop up share while competitors are in transition. So one example is just looking at the Nine West business. And while that business, they've been bought, they're going to be relaunched. What other brands have consumers that have purchased Nine West? So the list of brands here really should be focused on how they can steal some of that share during the transition. And, this is just one example, but, it may not be relevant to your business, but the idea is to really, while the business is, the market is strong right now, but because it's changed so much, some retailers and some brands haven't been able to change as quickly. So there's opportunity to gain share. E-commerce, obviously a huge story in our space, and you can see the trajectory is similar to the overall retail sales curve, but the only difference is that the market never went into the negative. It slowed, e-commerce slowed as some of the markets became a little bit more mature there, but that's picked up as well, and I expect that to continue, especially through the holiday season. Here's the retail penetration of some of those key industries that I told you about. So essentially how much of the sales are being done online. So footwear is near the top and just shy of 30%, and it was, kind of one of the first, believe it or not, one of the first industries to really build up that online business. Consumer electronics is up there with almost 40% of the sales being done online. And we get asked often, how high can this go? I do believe there's headroom, and I'll show you a slide in a little while that explains why I think that. But, I do think one of the things that's going to happen is that as retail, online and offline, becomes increasingly blended, it's actually going to be a little bit hard for us as brands, as retailers, as research firms to really be able to track what's been sold online versus what's been sold on store, because consumers may order it online and pick up it in a store, or vice versa, and maybe classify it as one or the other. And retailers are starting to handle the business differently as well, starting to fill inventory, online orders from store inventory, or maybe, store inventory, not hold as much store inventory in general because they can feed from their online warehouse. So, this is a little bit of ways away, but, we do see the two, sides of it becoming increasingly blended. Okay, so let's talk footwear more specifically. So I mentioned that there are kind of 5 buckets that I put the industry in right now. The first theme is really just that the market has returned to growth this year, and that's very positive, and I'll take you through what's driven that. So we're now in the 12 months ending September. The market is now at about $72 billion, and that's a new peak. The prior peak was around January 17, and prior to that, it was in July of 16. But you can see that, for the last year or so, the market has really plodded along kind of at flat, down one, up one, and then this year, heading into spring and, into the fall, growth has accelerated. And that's, in the last year, that's an incremental $3.7 billion in volume, which is, very significant. And here's how it breaks out by gender. About $34 billion in women's, and that's just shy of half of the market. Men's about just shy of 40% of the market at about $28 billion, and kids at about $10 billion at 14%. And when we look at the percent of the growth, so the percent of that $3.7 billion, it's actually, for the first time, I think that I've seen, it's right in line with sales. So when I presented this at mid-year, ending June, men's was actually pulling more of the weight, driven by the success in the fashion athletic business. But actually, that's slowed. The men's business has slowed slightly since then, and really, every segment of the market is pulling its weight in growth. So I actually just thought this was very interesting. We're at a very balanced point right now. So here's what's changed. A year ago, when we looked at the market by broad categories, and when you see fashion, that means your fashion shoes, boots, and sandals. Sport leisure is are what we call sport lifestyle sneakers, so non-performance sneakers, sport slides and skate. Performance is performance athletic. Outdoor is all-weather product and cold weather product, and outdoor activity, so like hiking and water. And then workout safety is for, the work business. So fashion remains the largest category, but, sport leisure has gained a little bit there. So you can see that the share and the distribution hasn't changed dramatically. But last year when we looked at this, the only growth area was that sport leisure piece. And now this year, every area is more positive, and the fashion piece has returned to growth. And that's mainly being driven by women's. In terms of what's driving it from a channel perspective, the top 3 channels in the total footwear business are online pure plays, department stores, and branded shoe stores. Now, it's fascinating to me to see online pure plays here as the biggest channel because about, between 10 and 15 years ago when I started tracking the channels, there was a very distinct pattern. Mass merchants was number 1, department stores was number 2, and online pure plays was at the bottom and starting to grow. And another thing to note at that time was that the gap between the channels was very distinct. Mass merchants had almost 20% of the share, followed just behind by department stores. Now, I don't have the numbers here, but all 3 of these channels has about 11 or 10% of the share. So they're clustered much more because consumers are cross-shopping a lot, and no one channel owns a large majority of the business. And you might be surprised to see department stores on the map here, but that's really being driven by their online business. And branded shoe stores, that is, brand's own stores. So from a Nike store to a Skechers store to an UGG store, a Steve Madden store, and that's being driven by both the online business and some of those retailers are still getting consumers, in the store. And that's where most of the growth is coming from. I think about a third of the growth is being generated by branded shoe stores. And I'll talk a little bit more about this when we get into the age breakdown. Shoe chains, so many of us call this the family channel. So retailers like a Famous Footwear or Shoe Carnival that are servicing, the whole family, self-serve, with a value play. And then online pure plays as well. A little bit more about the in-store and online businesses. For the first time, we've started to see growth in-store, and that's to the tune of about $350 million. But online was up 13% and added about $2.4 billion to the market. And we look at online, we can look a little deeper into what's going online because we have some buyer metrics as well through a service we call checkout tracking. And we actually get information from consumers' receipts. So for example, if you buy something on a footwear website or any website, you get an email confirmation right away. And we partner with a company called Rakuten Slice that compiles this information confidentially. And so we can see what consumers are buying online, and we can see that longitudinally. So we can see, that consumers bought, maybe only bought apparel and tech last year online, but this year they've also bought footwear online. And that's how early on I was able to see what brands buy, what consumers are buying certain brands because we can see their overall purchase behavior. So the penetration of online buyers is still continuing to increase, and that's why I do think there's more headroom in the online space. So 36% of consumers of online buyers bought footwear online last year, which is 2 points higher than the prior year. And they spent an average of $308 over the year, and that's a combination of their average spend per purchase, which actually is down a little bit versus the prior year, but the annual purchase frequency is up, and that overcompensates for the fact that average spend per purchase is down. So it's leading the average annual spend per buyer to be up a little bit, and that's helping the online business as well. Looking at demographics, not surprisingly, millennials are the largest segment at this point, and they're accounting for the largest segment of the growth. You may be surprised to see declines in Gen Z, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But again, millennials, the largest segment in the labor force right now. We've seen Hispanic spending turn around, and that's accounting for a big chunk of the millennial growth. And what we find with millennials is that the brick and mortar piece is still important. So let's talk about that a little bit more. First on Gen Z, the younger Gen Z business is good, and that's driven mostly by sport leisure, your fashion athletic piece, and that's primarily kids. The older Gen Z, which is kind of like mid-teens through age 21 or 22, that's what's down. And that's a little concerning because what we find is that this is where they may be spending money in other categories versus footwear. Of course, there are areas of footwear that are strong here, so skate and sports slides. But there are declines in some other larger categories, so more of the sport, the casual athletic piece, fashion shoes, and performance athletic. In millennials, what struck me was more about where they're purchasing and not what they're buying. And this was, highly driven by purchases at branded shoe stores, factory outlets, and athletic specialty. So both branded shoe stores and factory outlets are branded, and the athletic specialty piece is what's driving the fashion athletic. And here, what's interesting is that there is slightly more growth coming from in-store versus online. It's just over 50% is coming from purchases bought in-store. But when you think about the online business, which is generating 90% of the growth overall, having 50% come from in-store is a big deal. And the same thing with older millennials. The growth is a little bit more evenly distributed, but it's among branded shoe stores again, apparel specialty, so retailers like Old Navy and some of the fast fashion retailers that are focusing more on footwear, and the online pure plays. And here, in-store and online, again, it's about 50-50% of the growth. So what we see from millennials is that in-store is much more important than it is to, the total population, where it's, only getting about 10% of the growth. But for millennials, it's at least 50% of the growth. And back to Gen Z. This is qualitative, but we had a summer associate that did some research on Gen Z this summer, and, she put together some research on, where they're spending their money. So, it's other areas, and this isn't just exclusive to Gen Z, but we do find it's a little exaggerated. They're so used to spending on tech. You see video games, there's that Fortnite thing again. They're going out with friends, they're spending on coffee. It's no big deal to spend, $3 on a cup of coffee. They're using rideshare and hailing apps. They're concerned with health and wellness, so they're spending on beauty. And they're traveling. And again, not so exclusive to Gen Z, but this piece is very important because they're traveling, they're going to concerts, festivals, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And of course, education, that's a big bill that they're footing. Okay, so coming down a little bit deeper into really what's driving the growth in footwear this year. From a brand perspective, what I call the hot list, the top 10 growth brands versus last year, year-to-date September, for women, men, and kids, and I'll pop that up there, obviously in a webinar or format. I'll let you study it a little bit. But what you see across the genders is, of course, you see, the athletic brands on here, and Vans has been one that has moved up the ranks, and that's more of, the skate lifestyle and the aspirational. And you see casual fashion product from Adidas and Nike, and, so just FYI, I've excluded performance footwear here, but you still see brands like Nike and Adidas on here because they're driving so much of the casual athletic business. Birkenstock continues to grow in women's. We see comfort brands really moving up the ranks, Naturalizer, Clarks, UGG, which we technically don't classify as comfort, but obviously is a huge comfort component, continues to grow. And Gucci, and what's interesting is that we see, even though Gucci is a designer brand, it's winning with some of the same things some of the other brands are, sneakers, slides, in the comfort arena. And in men's, the call-outs is really that fusion of fashion and athletic, and that's what's driving some of the brands like Cole Haan. We see Crocs making a comeback. And we see Ariat on the boot front. In kids, it's a lot of those same brands. Native is one that continues to climb up the ranks, with just very easy, very functional year-round options now, and UGG here as well. It's a little bit more varied. When we look at what segments are driving the growth, I alluded to this a little bit. Here is what's making up the growth in terms of the segments. So the active leisure piece of it, which is that darker blue bar, those are kinds of brands that focus on that space. So your typical athletic brands, are driving the bulk of the growth across genders. You then see the next biggest is the lighter blue, which is comfort. And in men's, you see the bridge, but what's really driving that are brands like Cole Haan and UGG that have done a great job fusing that athletic and fashion elements. And when we look at the top silhouettes that are driving each gender in the fashion space, it's mostly comfort and function driven year to date. Fashion sneakers in men's, sports slides, the mules, which is driven by Crocs, the work safety boots and sneakers, which is both a utility play but also a fashion play. In women's, a lot of the same, fashion slides, mules, clogs, driver loafer, and strappy sandals and sports slide actually tied for the 5th spot. And strappy sandals is an interesting one because it's one where, it's a broad category. The top growth items are really more comfort-driven, but of course there are some, items from some of the fashion brands that are, a little bit more dressy in nature that drive a lot of volume as well. but some of those even have a little bit more of a comfort element than they did in the past, like a block heel. And in kids, some of the same as well. Sneakers, slides, you see sandals a little bit here. But when you get, in kids in particular, when you get past sneakers, there's, only about 20% of the market left. So the other styles are really fighting for some growth here. And you may have seen in the press some data quoted from NPD this spring through the early summer about, sneaker sales continuing to rise and high heel sales continuing to decline. So that was, a big story as the sneaker business continued to grow. And, it continues. We do see some turning around in higher heels, but it's different than it was in the past. It's on items and styles and brands that are more comfort focused. And I think that the popularity of sneakers and the growth of this business, is part of some broader things that are going on in the market. Obviously, society as a whole has become much more casual. Our workplaces are more casual. People are working remotely or, maybe at home, maybe in shared workspaces where there just isn't the need to dress like, we used to in the professional environment. Of course, the athletic is fashion trend continues to be strong. You see that on the runways. You see that in celebrities. I talked about what was going on in apparel in the athletic space. And, that is having a major impact as well and driving the sneaker business. I feel that the seasonless aspect is really one of them that is a huge benefit for sneakers. Consumers, with weather being a little bit more unpredictable, consumers are looking for options that can be more versatile and year-round, maybe not in a blizzard, but, I would definitely say from my, foot research this past summer, I saw far fewer people wearing sandals and, many more just wearing sneakers throughout the summer. And celebrities and social movements. So when you've got actors at Cannes Film Festival protesting the outdated dress codes and saying that they want to be comfortable, and Serena Williams saying, hey, look, I'm wearing sneakers under my dress at the royal wedding, that's going to have an impact as well. And consumers in busy lives are just much more reluctant to compromise on comfort than they have been in the past. You can see, in the comfort space, a number of brands are winning. It's mostly aligned between the genders. And they're winning. There's various silhouettes, but sneakers is a common thread. But some of these, as I mentioned, are winning, with heels, Naturalizer in particular, with pumps and strappy sandals. So it does vary, but we do see, strong growth in the comfort space. But I will say that, most of what I've shown you is either a 12-month view or year-to-date September, and not much had changed since we were talking about year-to-date June. But when we looked at September, when we got our September results, we actually saw a little bit of a shift. So it'll be interesting to see how the fall progresses. But in women's, we saw boots starting to grow. Now, keep in mind that fashion boots, so like low shaft booties, high shaft boots, mid shaft, we're still at a point that is much lower than it was 2 to 3 years ago in terms of dollar sales, but that's leveled out and starting to grow again. And sneakers, for the first time in a while, wasn't the #1 growth area. Of course, it's number 2. And September was a very, rainy month. There were some, unfortunate and, wild weather events, like in North Carolina. But it was wet throughout the country in many areas, so rain boots picked up. We're seeing this more of that buy now, wear now type of thing. In men's, we saw boots pick up as well, various kinds, and then kids as well. So it really was, a little bit of a turnaround. We had not seen any boots pick up, heading into fall. I mean, September, in July, there was a little bit, driven by, some of the promotions that were going on, Nordstrom Prime Day, so some early fall selling. But, it's really that buy now, wear now mentality. And one thing that we know, my my slides here were more about the first half of the year, but I actually would argue that, really the whole year in terms of the seasons have become much more unpredictable. And this is just one example. When you look at early in the year, I would think that's a very tough time, January, February. It's very weather dependent, holidays over. You see that boots get cleared off the floor, yet winter is really just getting going in many places. So I think there's still opportunity to align the retail calendar with, the consumer calendar and their needs. But, so you can see that it's just been very unpredictable. And we see a little bit in key silhouettes, a little bit of shift to online in this time period, because as the stores transition, now consumers are learning that they could search out things online. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, and I think we as the industry could actually use that to our advantage. As the weather and the seasons become more unpredictable, we can adjust those levers and maybe hold more inventory for online sales, whereas stores become showcase for, future products. We have to figure out how that best works. And of course, we have all new seasons now. We have a totally new season that's developed in the last couple of years. Before we even talk about spring, we're talking about festival, and it's big. And you see some of these bolded numbers here. There are a lot of eyes on at these festivals, and they're becoming big opportunities for marketing. And we see it driving sales. This year we did kind of a cross-industry recap of what we saw happen during festival season. And of course, we had to make some assumptions. We can't say that all jean sales in the 3 months ending May could be attributed to festival, but what we did was focus on categories that were really highly marketed during that time, and even beauty. And I thought it was really fascinating how even tech companies got into the fray. And you can see by this post from Belkin that of course they're going to focus on mobile power, because you're going in the desert for 3 days, you're going to need a lot of backup power. But they merchandise that with the kind of the whole look, footwear to accessories to apparel, and even the luggage. So we're definitely finding that this has become a major experiential marketing opportunity. But of course, as that grows, brands need to make sure that they will stand out and not get lost in the fray. And of course, this year sandal season peaked actually earlier than it had in the past because May was particularly warm. So we just don't quite know, and that's why we have to, even though it sounds good to say, it's very hard to better plan for that unpredictability. And the last couple of points I want to make is just the rapid pace of innovation and how it's picked up over the last couple of years. And I'm sure you're all seeing it. And a lot of it's being driven by the digital native brands and the direct-to-consumer startups, and they're focusing on a couple of key things. The commonalities are the emphasis on sustainability, simplicity, transparency, what's the story behind it? Where do the products come from? Where are they sourced? How are they made? And the omni-channel aspect and how the online and offline spaces work together. And, some of these examples that I have pictured here, they cross many different. Obviously, Allbirds can, be under the sustainability bucket as well. But it's just putting a level of innovation and thought leadership in the industry that other brands now are starting to try to catch up with. And there's money here. A lot of these startups are getting funding, and funding is going to, anything to do with comfort, casual sneakers, because those are the hot areas. Anything with innovation in shopping. New ways to shop like StockX or Stadium Goods, some of the resale areas, and anything having to do with sustainability. So those are to take back to your own businesses, that those are the hot topics where some of these startups are getting funding. And newness is very important. This just shows you we can track launch dates. So we look at products that were launched, before 2016 and all the way through, first half of 2018. And their contribution to sales in the first half of 18. And the bulk of the business for men's and kids especially was coming from older product. Women's was a little bit more balanced, but still a big chunk, 30% coming from older products. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because obviously we're talking about products like, certain sneakers or Birkenstocks that have been around a long time and are still driving a lot of volume. But it's just knowing how to balance that with, new products and looking at this for your own business. Of course, comfort technologies becoming much more important, but a lot of this may be getting lost on the consumer. So it's about how do we convey our messages without confusing consumers with too much, technical jargon. And consumers want innovation and they want comfort. This is a question we put out to our consumer panel. They want some of the features they're getting in their apparel. They want lightweight, breathable, odor resistant. And machine washable was actually one that was very interesting, and this is most important to ages 35 to 54, and maybe those are consumers that maybe have kids who really are calling for an easier way to keep things clean. And we see it. We see more machine washable footwear both for adults and kids out in the market now. And this leads into the ideas of sustainability and transparency that I mentioned briefly. Again, a discussion that is all of a sudden, very front and center in the last year. Consumers are concerned about these issues in terms of their footwear. And, human rights was the top concern. 40% of consumers did say that they, didn't necessarily aren't concerned about any of the above, but that number is much lower for younger consumers. And so those are the consumers, we saw that. The millennials are the largest group. And they're our largest consumer base now. Maybe if they're not for your brand right now, they're going to be in the future. So we have to feed into this. It's been big themes at the Outdoor Retailer Show, and we saw it for some of the more fashion-oriented shows as well. What are brands doing to, do our part, for the environment? And 36% of 18 to 34-year-olds, so over a third, said that they have made a purchase specifically because they've supported a brand's social position. And in footwear, 41% of consumers say that eco-friendly and sustainable materials are important to them when considering footwear purchases. And of course, the question is always, well, will they pay more? I think, this is still a lower number. This question was asked of apparel, but I think it can apply to footwear as well. This is 30% of consumers saying yes, I think is a lower number than we'd like, because consumers say yes, it's important, but they don't necessarily say they're willing to pay more. So it's almost, it's the standard and it's expected. And we're seeing a lot of innovation here in materials, from plastic to food, and we'll continue. What are some new and innovative materials that not only, are sustainable and eco-friendly, but that also help the performance of the footwear. So whether that's making it breathable or washable. So there's a lot coming out of this besides just being good for the environment. So, when we look at all that, this is what we see moving forward beyond now, as we're kind of getting to the point, I can't believe it, of closing out 2018. We still see sport leisure as the dominant driver, but fashion has returned to growth as well, and that's very positive. And it's driven by comfort. Online sales accounted for 90% of that growth, and it's increasing. 2/3 of the growth was driven by millennials, and one of the most important things to remember is that they still value that in-store experience. That's exciting, and they're finding it in a lot of the fashion athletic stores right now. And when you look at the brands that are moving up the ranks, the brands that have moved up in terms of growth and volume, many of them are athletic and comfort focused. And so what does this mean? We have to remember that comfort is not a bad word anymore. It used to be, we hide it in the back, it's for old ladies, but that's not the case anymore. And I challenge retailers to really shake it up and maybe not have a full separate, section for comfort. Let's mix it up a little bit. Comfort is fashion now, and many brands are doing a much better job with this. And, the societal shifts and priorities mean that this won't be short-lived. And that doesn't mean that consumers aren't going to start dressing up again, because, we do tend to see that pendulum swing. But when they do, they want to be as comfortable as they are in their sneakers all day. And what seasons? we have to do a better job planning for the unpredictable. And I know that sounds silly, but now with various levers that we can pull with different ways to reach consumers, we have more opportunity than ever to do that. And we've got to take advantage of opportunities to reach our consumers and look for new consumers where they are. You know, is that in airports? Is that in tourist destinations? Is it at festivals? And the acceleration in innovation means that some will fall behind, so we don't want to do that. So the key to the innovation is solving problems consumers didn't even know they had, and that's across industries what some of these startup brands are doing. And you've got to over-communicate the features and benefits, but not necessarily being caught up in the technology. And lastly, the social and eco-consciousness. The consumers that will soon make up, you know, your largest consumer base, if they're not already, they care about these things. And, you know, I know that it's not possible necessarily to overhaul your entire business, but just figure out how you can play here and then market it. Is it one item that, you know, is reducing waste or, you know, has recycled materials, and, you know, and then, you know, market that and get consumers to back you on that. And then lastly, just, you know, in terms of, you know, what I'm thinking about for holiday, you know, real simple. In terms of the retail environment and holiday, it's more. Stores are going to be open longer. And it's funny because on Thanksgiving Day, it's almost more in the opposite sense. We see more stores closing on Thanksgiving because they're tying into the, you know, the aspect of, you know, kind of staying home and spending the time with family, both for the employees and kind of encouraging shoppers to do the same. But they're opening at night, and they're going to be open all night, and they're earlier than ever on Black Friday, and I expect holiday hours to be, you know, extended more than ever. You know, more convenience, just with online gifting options, with more online-offline interaction in terms of being able to, you know, order online, pick up in store, vice versa. I just saw yesterday Nordstrom's going to, you know, you're going to be able to pick up your products, your gifts at Nordstrom before the store opens. You know, someone's going to run it out to you. So, you know, there's all these kinds of things, you know, more free 2-day shipping this holiday season. So retailers are upping the ante, and the consumer is definitely going to win this holiday season. In terms of trends, you know, what are we seeing? And I threw some accessories in here as well. You know, the home trend and kind of that nesting, and, you know, the Danish call it the hygge, you know, has inspired a whole new crop of comfort and coziness. I mean, UGG does it best, but others are doing it as well. And just, you know, that idea of, you know, everything being very comfortable and cozy and fluffy. You know, we will see consumers getting dressed up, but it's in a more comfortable way. So whether it's, you know, glitzy sneakers or just a detail on a heel that, you know, is a thicker heel that's more comfortable, we'll see consumers getting dressed up, but it's just, you know, in a more comfort and casual way. We've got new phones out there in the market. New phones always mean new accessories. So, you know, this is more for the accessory space, but new crossbodies that'll hold phones, new phone wallets, new phone cases, and that could steal share away from other categories. And then, you know, travel. Travel is huge, and it's going to continue to be huge, especially through the holiday season. And we're seeing in the luggage space, the accessory space, and even in the footwear space, products and brands that are focused on making consumers experience better when they travel. So whether it's more comfort, it's lightweight, it's packable, from both a accessories focus and a footwear focus, those are products that are going to win this holiday.